Boy, speaking about being a genius at pushing buttons, I just pushed them all in the wrong order. I was just giving
Right?
Andrew a hard time, our
Our
producer, who
producer,
you
right?
can't see. But anyway, welcome, Scott Baker. Good to see you this afternoon.
Are we on right now?
We are on.
Are you sure
Yep.
we're on? Okay,
I
we can
pushed the
go. Are we
buttons
go
in the
ahead?
right order. Yes, we're good to go.
All right. Well, good afternoon, Mikey. It's time for another edition of Lead Better, Friday afternoon, 3 o'clock Eastern Time. And today's field note is entitled The Transparency of Individual Compensation. We're talking about paychecks here. Is fraught with danger. So transparency is the key word when you go in early. And we've often thought about this in modern times. We're always wanting government transparency and we want clarity from this. And we want there's protests at company meetings for more transparency. We think of this as a value. And some leaders think of transparency as a value. But the question here is what if real full transparency is actually dangerous or detrimental to your organization?
Yeah. So we got Radical Candor as a book. I'm actually, it sounds like I'm being a little bit cynical with what I'm saying here, but Radical Transparency probably should have been a book that was written as well, right? Where
Yeah,
people
right.
have gone all in on this idea that it is the best way to work.
Yeah, and we all kind of know this at some level. To be, you're always thinking, all right, okay, am I getting what's my paycheck relative to this other person? I mean, the question I think I would ask everybody is, if you knew, right? If you knew the salary of the person that was kind of equivalent to you, and you actually knew that you outperformed them, well, what would that do if you knew? Like, would it increase the levels of trust? Would it make you emotionally happier? Right? What you can't unsee the number. So
Right.
should everybody know the number?
Yeah. And do you want to push that conversation to the dark corners of the office, or do you want it to just kind of be open in public? And so it's a really tempting thing, right?
Yeah.
And Netflix famously in 2013 went this transparency route, and they ended up walking it back.
Yep.
I think there's a great number of organizations who try this. And there was something about 2014, 2013 when this was really kind of going through people. And
I wonder what it was about that time period.
I don't know. Maybe it was the tail end of Occupy Wall Street.
Or it was after, I mean, we're a couple of years past the '08 crash, and people are like, all right, what's going on in these organizations? Could be.
Exactly. I think that's probably where the pull came from. And at the time, there was a organization called Buffer who actually went this Radical Transparency Act and continued with it. And here, more than 10 years later, they're still doing it. But they actually had a situation that happened in 2022 that kind of made them regret. And I'm sure internally they discussed whether or not that they were going to abandon their transparency ethic. They would never, admit it at this point, I'm sure. But they had a very specific formula, and there was the role value times the experience of an individual worker times the cost of living plus stock options.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
Right. And so it was a little bit of a complicated formula, but based on that, everyone should know what everybody else makes.
By and large, yeah.
Right. And so they were able to maintain that formula. But then in 2022, a hiring mistake made it obvious that they hired somebody for an offered salary that the person accepted, and then other employees recognized there's a mistake here. Right. And so all of a sudden you've got this time where you're like, how do we do this? Do we walk it back?
Right.
Because we actually did want this person in the door. We did make them that offer. So are we going to honor that offer, or are we going to rescind the offer here 6 months into this person working here? And so it became this complicated thing as to how it was that they were going to fix it. But all to say that level of transparency is not like a one and done decision. It is something that a place like Buffer had to maintain, and still is maintaining years later.
Although I think I remember seeing something that they've modified it. Like if I recall, it's been a while since I looked, but whether or not they have made a full change or just a slight tweak, most of the organizations that have tried this have not stuck with it. Right now, I don't know, and didn't ask Randall about this. We often say that the field notes are sort of driven by real examples. Our coaches are out there and they're talking, and we talk about things in the firm. And so the other day we were talking about one and kind of came out of this issue, and they're like, yeah, Randall was coaching a leader, and it was something relatively rare that came up, and that became a field note. I imagine that he was coaching a leader who was probably like, I think we're going to publish everybody's salaries, right? Or was saying that people in the firm wanted everybody to publish his salaries. And so he was thinking about it. We walked through it. So the question, I think, in general is, you know that this does happen in some places where it's just the way that you understand all those categories. Meaning, if you're in government, there's just different tiers and GS levels and all of these things where you go like, okay, that job is a this, therefore that person must make somewhere within this tight range, right? Kind of like a weight class. And all of a sudden you mentioned buffer, and I started thinking UFC fights. So I'm thinking of like bandwidths of weight classes. Right. So, but you see, my point is, like, we have a prurient curiosity. And it does affect us because we're all like looking at like, what's the compensation of what you're doing, and you want your work to matter. And if you're doing work, there's some reward that happens out in the world for that. So there's nothing unusual or wrong with being curious, and also knowing what your worth is in the marketplace, right? So that's a healthy thing. So if it's now, I don't know that anybody would say, you know what? It's the fact that we know what everybody in government makes that makes government work so well. Well, we're all going to go like, yeah, that's what's making it work so well, right?
Yeah. Right.
So I don't know. So why would it be sort of relatively not good, but functional that people know, right? Or they know what teachers make in a certain school district. But yet it ends up being a disaster in most sort of companies or organizations.
It definitely gives you the appearance that there's no corruption going on, right? Mm-hmm. It gives you the assurance that nepotism doesn't exist here. Mm-hmm. That we haven't done anybody any like extra favors, mm-hmm. right? But at the end of the day, it's even your most talented employees are the ones that become the most disgruntled by it all. Mm-hmm. Right. And the field note kind of cites that for us, right? The mm-hmm. research shows that your top performers are going to be the ones that are going to be the most upset about this.
Right? Yes, right. And the fact that they're top performers is they're driven by some of this. Some people are like, yeah, just kind of pay me, you know. And right. But the top performers, they want to know, and they're as competitive as the athletes who are like, you're not giving me enough playing time, like yes. you know, and they're. And you know how those guys are, and their salaries get published mostly. And talk about variations in bandwidth. You can have guys in the same locker room that are making $10 million more than the guy who's almost as good as they are.
That competitiveness is something that you want in your top performers. And I posted that quote on Twitter, and someone came back to me immediately and was like, that's because we know that we're producing 80% of the revenue for the company, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
It was like he used the word we as if like this has been a hot topic for him. But certainly, right, if the 80-20 rule holds up in that kind of way, then those 20% of your people who are producing 80% of your revenue mm-hmm. Are not going to be, they're not going to like that the compensation is transparent that way.
Well, to me, this is why I think leaders need to think about this beyond just kind of whether people get like jealous over paychecks. I think it's bigger than that. And I sometimes go back to this Charlie Munger quote about incentives. If you as an organization can be thinking about how to improve the idea or the clarity of the incentives in the organization, you probably shouldn't be focused on anything else. Like the way that you get people to be like, come do this with us. Here's what we're doing. When this all happens, here's what happens to everybody involved. And so then when that's clear in some way, shape, or form, you're like, all right, let's go. And if the person on my team, and if they've really killed it and they're getting bonus for that, all the better for them, right? Mm-hmm. And I do think that then it does go back to your own sort of sense of what does a particular paycheck mean? And we're obviously living in sort of turbulent times where people are kind of thinking about like, oh, is AI going to take my job? Is my paycheck going to go down? Well, what will happen if the government runs out of this kind of benefit, or if they claw back that? There's a lot at stake here, and I think we're going to see a real evolution probably over the next 5 years in terms of what some of this outlook looks like. And then how do you talk to your teens and 20-somethings about what the future of work looks like for them? There's a lot of stuff you can control. You can't control. But what you have to say is you all, no matter what, wherever you are, you have the opportunity to say, I'm going to go do something in the world, and if my priority is how that makes other people better, if it solves a problem for them, then there will likely be a demand for it, even in your own organization. And that will kind of ensure your value in some way, shape, or form. And I've told this story before, but when I first got hired as a local television reporter, anchor back in the day, I was probably making minimum wage. And I joked, I used to sell television sets when I was in college at Montgomery Ward's at the Annapolis Mall in Annapolis, Maryland. And for a long time, I made more money selling television sets as a part-time job, hourly, based, sort of with commission, more than I made when I was actually on television for a good while, right? Because there's very few television jobs. Lots of people want those jobs. This is 40 years ago, but that drives down the entry-level salaries. And actually, after I got hired, and there was I was hired, it was part-time. I just told the guy, my boss, I just said, you fill out my timesheet. He's like, what are you talking about? I said, you will never be able to pay me what I'm worth. He's like, what are you talking about? I said, I will always be trying to be worth 2-3 times more than you can possibly pay me. And whatever number I put down is going to be wrong. So, and I put it back on him. He actually took the challenge. And I said, you just fill out my work. You tell me. And I ended up getting doubled. My salary got doubled 6 months later. It got doubled 6 months later after that. But it wasn't because I was in there asking for a raise all the time or comparing myself to the other person. I was out there saying, am I on the front line here? Am I doing the most value for this organization? If you kind of focus on that, it's going to take care of itself. Now, this isn't intended to be a discussion or around your own sort of sense of compensation in the world as much as this issue of transparency. But you see the underlying issue kind of comes to the leader to say, am I fostering the right kinds of attitudes in the people on my team so that they feel fairly treated and that they have an opportunity to move forward and that they're cheering for each other? Right.
Now, the idea of transparency as an ethic in your values is something that you want. So we make the point in the field note. So that transparency is in the process, not necessarily in the outcomes, right? And there's an important point to be made there. But if you're going to go this route of saying, no, radical transparency, everything's transparent, then you need to be prepared with the idea that if you're going to you can't do this just on compensation. I think the reason that Buffer is still doing that today is because this notion of transparency ended up affecting their entire brand identity and every way that they run their company. And so they couldn't go back because it would completely destroy their brand, right? So they had a few big things that happened as a result that have been touted by everyone who kind of studies the Buffer, case study, in that they had a huge boon in their recruiting efforts simply because of the number of people that were talking about it. The company also reported a 94% retention rate as a result since in the last decade or so. And they also like the idea that that their culture ended up filtering out for them the people who would be okay with the fact that they were doing this radical transparency kind of thing. And so in their recruiting efforts, this acted as a filter that allowed people to be like, no. So those are three things that if I was going to act as devil's advocate in saying that transparency is a good thing here, I'd be like, well, what's the answer to those things? But I really do think that Buffer is kind of a strange case. Their internal effort around the idea of like what actually happened to that case, I think that some of the things they probably wish they could have been able to walk back, but they couldn't because they're really trapped in their brand identity at this point.
Well, and look, there's certain kinds of things that a tech company like that in a certain sector, and they provide things, I think, sort of around social media, but as an infrastructure. So they're not like highly visible as a namely identified organization. It might work there, might not work for the machine shop, might not work for the car dealership, might not work for, for your school system. There's all kinds of things that just don't apply, across all of these things. The thing that the field note really underlines is this idea that transparency of process category of treatment is different than the explicit diagnosis of exactly what that person's making, and or other areas of transparency. If people just kind of have a general idea, here's what happens, and we do this in our own company. And now we have different parts of our company where some people are everyone's full-time employees. We actually are probably the largest organization of full-time executive advisors that work at our level. Like, I mean, it's most of those companies out there, they just have people on contract, and they're not really bought in to, like, holding hands with each other around really great, content. But we are. But there's a base kind of clarity of like what people make when they walk into one of those positions. After that, it's up to them. They're running their own book of business and how they deal with their clients and how they decide to portion their team. And so there's a lot of flexibility. And so you can see an upper register of what the possibilities are. And I think that's what we all want to see. We all want to see possibility, and we all want to feel like we're being treated fairly. But you just don't need to have all, I don't think, in most cases, it's always been a net negative for all of that information to be out there in terms of here's how what the outcome is, including individual compensation.
Andrew was paying attention to our Substack chat, and so one question did come in, even though that you wrapped it up there nicely for us to end there. But I think this is a good question. So do you think at the end of the day, does transparency of the compensation create conflict, or does it kind of merely reveal what was already existing?
My gut would say that it can create conflict because we are human beings. We have this element of I'm always looking over, I'm looking over the fence. You're looking at this person. You're trying to make all kinds of divisions, and people are going to kind of get defensive.
Comparison does kill contentment, and so if you're putting more things on the board to compare,
okay, for everybody here, I'm going to tell a 30-second story. There's a longer version of this story, and I'm not even sure I'm allowed to tell it. But I'm going to give you a 30-second story. It's not about compensation, but it's about transparency. I think you'll like it for Friday afternoon. You can decide. So I've heard about an organization, new leader. I know that this is true. I came in, they've been there a year. This person does not really know many of the people that work in the organization, like even that report to them, because they've decided they want to work from home most of the time, that their family is their priority. Okay. Now, they ran a big survey through the organization. How's it going in our organization? And they had a criteria, and people just ignored that and said, well, actually, you don't seem to care because you're hardly ever in the office and you don't even know most of the names of the people on your team. Now, a couple hundred people in this organization.
So they answered the survey by ignoring the question.
By ignoring the questions and just burying the leader. Now,
okay, ballot kind of stuff. That's crazy.
Part of the issue was, now this person, and they're not the head of the whole thing. I'm being a little vague here, but they have a big position in this organization. And when you walk by the office, you can see into this person's office, right behind the reception desk, big glass door, and there was supposed to be an open door policy and all that. And there was a little pushback. Oh, I'm in the office. Oh, well, we can see in the office. The lights are out. You're not there.
Yeah.
So the answer for this leader, everybody watching, was this leader then, and the money of expenditures is public in this organization. They spent $25,000 blocking up the whole thing so you couldn't see into the office anymore.
Okay.
We're going to get rid of the transparency that allows you to know that I'm not in the office.
Right. Which, by the way,
that was their answer to the problem.
If you had done that,
is that a good story?
Yeah. If you'd done that before running the survey, no one would even have thought. But now everything's under scrutiny because you decided that transparency was going to be available for you in one area. So, and that's the ultimate point. Transparency is not something that you can apply just to compensation. It needs to be an operational decision, and it's going to affect everything. So just be aware of the fact that if you're going down that road, it's going to mean pretty much everything for everybody. And I think in a lot of ways, that's why people don't choose to go that way.
I will just tell you, and maybe in the days to come, there's a much longer version of the story that has more elements that are just as shocking.
Okay.
But that one, the person that decided, the leader that said, okay, everybody is not happy that I'm not in the office, so therefore I will try to cover up the transparency to make it impossible for you to even know if I'm in there or not.
Ludicrous.
You'll be thinking about that story all weekend.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Talk tomorrow.
See you, Mikey.